I just want to start by saying thank you to everybody who came out here today. So to start, in our current day, giving up when things get tough is for some reason becoming increasingly popular and accepted by our society at large. I think that this is terrible for our growth. Being in areas where you're pushing your limits and your boundaries is where you experience true growth, and even more so if the situation is unplanned and really out of your hands. I'd written a bit about this for class, and I coined it entitlement theory. Again, the current societal climate pushes the ideal that excuses are far easier to come by than solutions. The world truly owes me nothing, and I've known that. I know I have to go out there and I have to take what I want. If we refuse to take ownership of our situations and responsibility for our actions and our futures, no progress will ever be seen. Always refusing to believe that you cannot overcome the hardship you're in will lead to a winning mentality instead of breeding this victim mentality. But people close to me have thankfully reminded me that I have a lot to be thankful for and a lot that I've overcome, and I need to acknowledge that. And in acknowledging that, I might be able to inspire somebody else, which is what my goal of this talk is. If somebody can take something from what I say tonight and use that to overcome something that they're facing, I would consider this a success. So I've never gotten too caught up in the statistics of people going through similar experiences to me because statistics aren't definite. Just because something is 99% likely to happen, there's still a 1% chance it doesn't. There are many success stories you can find that follow this path. So I am also a very analytical person, and I appreciate good research. So statistically, I shouldn't be where I am right now. I should probably either be dead, a drug addict, or in jail. Pulling from the foster care to prison study, orphan children are 50% more likely to end up in prison for a year or longer before the age of 23. Usually going through something deeply traumatic, whether it be physically, mentally, emotionally, or sexually, children are 3 to 4 times more likely to kill themselves compared to their peers. They're significantly more likely to experience mental health issues like depression, anxiety, PTSD, eating disorders, and substance use disorders via the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. While their peers who go without these experiences are 75% more likely to graduate from high school. This comes from Child Abuse, Sexual Assault, Community Violence, and High School Graduation, which was published in the Review of Behavioral Economics. From my experience, if you want to be successful and break the cycle of what's come before you, these all sound like a lot of excuses. Instead of these being reasons why I won't make it, I've used them as motivation as to why I have to make it. All I've ever known is that I cannot be like the majority of my family and end up that way. I need to change something and break the cycle. At the end of the day, you have a choice in everything you do. Even though at times it may seem like there are no other options, it's not the truth. So I was born in 2000 in Hammond, Indiana, and I was essentially gave up right off the bat to my grandma April, who was my mother's mom. Due to the fact that my parents weren't really fit to be raising children, my mother was a heroin addict and a dope dealer in the south side of Inglewood, while my father was a heroin addict and a Latin King, which is one of the largest Hispanic gangs around spanning the US, and especially in the Chicagoland area. So my grandmother was an amazing woman. You might be able to say she was too good for this earth. She took great care of me, but sadly, her and I had gotten into a car accident when I was pretty young, in about 2004. So a semi had come into our lane, and it ran us off the road, and we ended up in a ditch. When this happened, in the following years, she underwent multiple invasive operations because she tore some of her trap and her lat, which really just jacked her neck and her back and her shoulders up. Now, if you've been keeping up with current events in pharma, about a year ago, Purdue Pharma actually lost a $6 billion lawsuit for their overprescription of OxyContin. And they actually met this deal as to be granted immunity in order for their works for the opioid crisis. So due to the doctors overprescribing of these medications and the overconsumption by my grandma, by 2009, her liver was pretty much shot. I was back at Community Hospital in Hammond, Indiana, the place I was born, now feeling like my world was about to leave. Before she passed away, though, on her deathbed, we had a conversation where I made a promise to her I would not turn out like my parents. I would break the cycle, I would go to college. And that promise has dominated my choice calculus ever since to keep me moving forward. After my grandma had passed, it wasn't very long before DCFS and CPS were contacted, and shortly after, the state attempted to take me away. When I was coming home from a friend's and I saw the police lights surrounding my house, I wasn't sure what to do, so I bolted. When I eventually came back home, I was detained. They didn't want to arrest me or anything, they just wanted to keep me to make sure I didn't run off. And in that time, I found out I was going to be sent to a group home, since it seemed like no one was coming to pick me up. Thankfully, my grandfather eventually came in, my mother's dad, and he took me in, and I ended up moving out to Griffith. So I moved to Griffith with my grandpa, my uncle Kyle, and who was a high schooler, and my step-grandma Kathy. My step-grandma Kathy had ALS, or Lou Gehrig's, which is a neurodegenerative disease that essentially is eating away at either your muscles or your bones. And it was pretty good there for a short bit of time, but it didn't stay like this for long. My grandpa at the time got heavily addicted to crack and became very physically and mentally abusive. As the recession hit harder in 2009, times got tougher and more drugs and crime came into the house. Matters only got worse when my mom had gotten out of prison and she moved in with us. She relapsed for the umpteenth time on heroin, but this time it didn't just affect her. It spread throughout the household to my grandpa and my uncle Kyle, who was now only 18 or 19. So the abuse and the living conditions only got worse, but with all this going on, I just wanted to focus on baseball, wrestling, my grades, and helping my grandma, because she was wheelchair-bound due to the ALS. On top of her neurodegenerative disease, she also had a poor functioning heart. So with the added stress of my mom coming in and out, and the other two now hooked on heroin, turning to crime to pay for their habits, her stress was not at a healthy level. And it wasn't long before her heart gave out. So in November of 2013, she passed away. And now, with essentially the only good person being gone in the house, cops caught on to the activities of the home pretty quickly. And there had already been multiple CPS calls dispatched to my house from my school, so the state took matters into their hand pretty quickly. And one weekend, my grandpa got arrested while thankfully I wasn't with him. And I ended up going to stay with this family in Chesterton, which is actually where I would stay and finish high school. So this was actually the best place I'd ever been since my grandma's death in 2009. At least at first. But over time, things in the house changed, and it just became very toxic. As things slowly went downhill, a few years in, I got a call randomly in my junior year of high school, about a week before my birthday, at the Friday night game, the Friday night football game. It was my mother, Jackie, who I hadn't spoken to in years. I actually had no idea how she had even gotten my number. She called me and she told me that she had overdosed again, but this time it had gotten to her heart, and now she had an infection and wasn't sure how long she'd live. Aside from dealing with Paul and Norman, the new friends and people I had surrounded myself with had become sort of this family that I never really had, and I was beginning to love where I was at. So the call from my mom really threw my world in a loop, and I had to decide whether to go see her or not, and I thought I would regret it later in life not doing it. So I sucked it up, and I went to see her. About a week after seeing her, she passed, and after this, the tension just continually built between me and my foster family and I. And eventually, it just led to a very unsafe environment. During this time, after moving out to Chesterton, wrestling had been my primary outlet, and it is what had allowed me to deal with problems that had bothered me, and I saw it as my way to get into college, along with my grades. So one time when we had gotten into an argument, they told me they were taking me out of wrestling. They weren't going to let me wrestle my senior year, and said I was done with it. I was leaving. We got into an altercation. I left. And then I was threatened with the cops. And I'm not stupid. I know I'm a minor at the time, so if they call the cops, I'll just be taken back home. Everything was weighing on top of my shoulders. I didn't think there was any way my life was going to work out now, or how I would even get into college to be successful and keep that promise. Stupidly, I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, so that night I went down to the barn and I grabbed a gun. My next action was almost the biggest regret of my life. But I stopped and thought about it. I would be turning 18 on Friday, only a few days later. Fuck this. I don't need to end my life. It's the easy way out. I'm only pushing my problems onto the people that I care about and not conquering anything that's facing me. When Friday came, I turned 18, I got all my things together, and I moved in with one of my friends. His parents were extremely understanding, and they knew all that was going on, so I moved in with them. I was able to wrestle and truly grow for what felt like the first time in forever in a safe environment. My senior year, I focused on school and wrestling, and everything was going really great until the night before regionals. In February of my senior year, again, I had gotten a call from a hospital, and I wasn't sure why. I had gotten told that my father had overdosed while driving on the Dan Ryan. He went over the median in oncoming traffic, and he had hit in a semi. And since I was his next of kin, I was notified for that reason. His death was announced to me shortly after. So now, before the end of my senior year, I had essentially moved out on my own with the help of my friend's parents, and now I'd lost both of my biological parents. There's many things I could have done, but I focused on wrestling, school, and trying to pick the right college. Oddly enough, picking the right college might have been the hardest decision for me. I was struggling to choose between Wabash and Central Michigan University. I really had this stigma of wanting to be a D1 athlete versus choosing this all-male, small, liberal arts college in Crawfordsville, Indiana. And it also felt like home. Once you come onto this campus, there's just something about it where you feel the support of everyone around you and you feel the brotherhood. And that's what really drew me here. Our choices and our time might be limited, but they're ours. One of the biggest things was realizing how quickly I was forced to grow up due to my parents' decisions. Instead of deciding what game I would want to play for the day when I was living with my mom, it might be more of a worry if I'd have to call the police for another overdose and hide all the paraphernalia before they got there. Instead of letting the bad things around me consume me, I always tried to just keep chucking forward. When I was living in Griffith and dealing with all the abuse, all I wanted to do was go to school, play baseball, and wrestle. I understood the system at a young age and what would happen if I got taken away again with no one else in my family to take me. And I didn't want to face that and suffer something that might possibly be even worse than where I was at. I stayed in advanced classes during this whole time and was almost always on honor roll, despite the conditions around me. There's choices we all have to make, but for some, what's at risk due to those choices is much more drastic in nature. After I moved out to Chesterton, I pretty much just blocked out everything that had happened from my past, and I just knew I wanted to get great at wrestling and do well in school and keep that promise I made to my grandma. And I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to do it, but I knew I was willing to put the work in to do it. After things got abusive in my household in Chesterton, nothing really changed, except the circumstances just became harder to accomplish my goal. But that's all right, because I made it out just fine, because I constantly made the choice to keep working, stay busy, and constantly improve myself so that there's no way I could ever end up in a scenario similar to that of my parents. I did almost lose the battle after engaging with these choices, coming close to my breaking point. Shortly after engaging with those thoughts, the logic hit me though. Everything I had been through would be a complete waste. And again, I would just be pushing that pain onto others. So there's no reason to do it. When I turned 18, I could legally move out. I moved in with one of my best friends. I grinded my senior year away, focused on school, wrestling, and living happily for what felt like the first time. Many people say that God gives his greatest battles to his strongest soldiers. And after losing my father, I could have just sulked, not gone to regionals, maybe not even finished my senior year of high school after losing my second parent in less than a year. But the next day, I woke up, I cut 7 pounds, I made weight, and I went on to be a runner-up at the regional, which it's not exactly what I wanted. It was short of my goal, but it was definitely not where I was projected to be 10 years prior. Later, after solidifying my decision to come to Wabash, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, but I knew, again, I was willing to put in the work. Now as I'm coming to the end of my time, I know I made the right decision, and I can only hope this institution acts as a sort of beacon for others. So I'd like to leave you with this. Instead of asking what everyone owes you or how you can do something that takes less work, think to yourself how you might be able, on the slightest scale, to change the life of another, your community, or the world for the better. Thank you.